YouTube.com, this is Ben Ash at BA Guitar Tuition, and welcome back for my second part of the Alison Hell tutorial that we started in previous. And today we're going to be looking over the bridge, the verse and the chorus of this particular tune. So first of all, let's tune up and let's rock out. We'll see you in a moment. Okay, so let's look at the bridge section of the song. Before we go into the verse, there's a very small little interlude that uses this little dyad passage of going between an A minor dyad, which will bass, let's say, around the 5th fret at the moment on the G and the B strings. But you can actually use exactly the same dyad, based around about the 10th fret of the D string and the 9th fret on the G. Now, depending on which one you use, you get a slightly different tonality. It sounds a bit more toppy, obviously on the treble strings, but it has a little bit more substance and full tone going between the D and the G. And it intermits with a pedal on the A string and slips the semitone down, let's say, if you're on the G and the B, from the 5th to the 4th fret, and if you're on the D string, it's going to be to the 10th to the 9th. And it just juxtapositions between those particular licks from the A minor position and then slipping down into the G sharp, which gives it more a diminished tone when against the A string. And that whole section goes on for roughly around 8 bars. And what Jeff does to kind of spice things up a little bit is he adds in a few little pick slides going between the chords, just going from, let's say, right from the base of the treble strings up around here from, let's say, the bridge pickup, sliding right past the capo on the nut. And other things he does is that because he played the bass parts in the original record, sometimes he emulates some of those parts on the guitar as well. Whereas on the record you just hear the little dyad motion, he might throw in this little, rather tasty little blues lick based around the 5th position on the guitar. And here it is again, a little bit slower. And after that particular section, we then are into our verse, which will go around for a number of, let's say, 4 times, as is the usual range with most pop songs. And the BPM will consist of 96 BPM, and it'll be consistent going through from the previous bridge section all the way into our chorus as well. And an example of how the verse should sound would be a little bit like this. Now, the first two bar progression is mainly based between the power chords of C5 and B5, with an intermittent pedal of 16th notes on the open A string. And what I suggest you to do is to build up your stamina and practice with the downstroke, and also intermitting between some alternate picking, because the nature of what Jeff does is kind of emulating what James Hetfield was doing, especially on notable songs like Master of Puppets, where all those riffs that you hear are all done with a downstroke rather than alternate picking. The alternate picking will be easier on a hand, but you don't quite get the same visceral attack that we'd have from the original performance. So the best way to kind of go about it is if you set your metronome to, say, 96 BPM, and you can take this on any particular string. We're going to choose the A string because it's relevant to the key we're playing in. And then you start pedaling off, single note motion in crotchets. Palm muted just to kind of get the separation and the punctuality in those notes. Still using the downstroke motion, and then you go into some 16ths. And if you move amongst that sub, you'll tend to find you'll be in the same time frame as the song, rather than just taking a metronome, slowing it down and speeding it up, because you won't necessarily have any particular relation to the groove of this particular song. So I always recommend you drop the subdivision and then you work your way up. And if you are feeling any strain in hand, obviously take a rest. Alternately, switch to alternate picking, which has a slightly more economical sound, if that's a little less of a visceral attack. Now, the little tail riff that you have is a line going from the note of A, and it kind of pedals around more an E minor diatonic motion, actually. But the reason I use this particular position is so that when I'm doing a downstroke, if I put a slight twist on my thumb, I start getting artificial harmonics out of it as well, which Jeff tends to apply because he's quite a hard hitter on the strings. It can be played on the open E string as well, and it's got quite a nice clean tone to that as well. But I tend to actually find, because you're pedaling on the A string, is to, rather than doing that line on that particular string, you can actually get this very, very small motion which looks more inherently around the E minor diatonic scale. Is doing those artificial harmonics all around between the open position, the second position and the third position, with first and second fingers. As this particular motif moves on, what you'll find is that the stabs will change a little bit. Whereas initially you had the one stab on the C going to the B, you'll then find there'll be a double stab. And then it will do the same thing on the B. Still with the tail going across with the artificial mics implied. Right, going into another variation, we're actually going to have a pause going on at the first beat of the bar. So we've initially gone from the initial chug, just going between the C5 and the B5. Next time round going for the double hits. Now going for the third time, we don't play anything on the first pulse, but we come straight back in on 2, which really should sound like this. What I'll do is I'll play the second variation with the double hits, and then I'll play the actual crotchet rest for the third run. It should sound like this. And by having that rust, it gives it a real dynamic punch into that particular riff. So it's really being mindful of the arrangement. First of all, we're just starting off with the conventional stabs on the 1 and the and after the 4. And then putting that extra hit on the second pulse. And then, when you go into your third variation, it's making sure that you've got that rest on the first beat and then coming straight back on the second. All in all, it should sound a bit like this with all those variations played together. Okay, let's move into our chorus section now. It's going to have a few variations very similar to the verse, where it's going to stand with a standard pattern and then it's going to kind of embellish with various different tail ends. The chords we're going to use are going to be F5, going to E5, A5, going to G sharp 5, F5 power chord, and then the E5 power chord. With an intermittent vamp on the low E, predominantly in the 16th notes. Now what Jeff does throw in that first variation of the riff, which should sound a little bit like this, to the BPM 96. And what I did there was throw in a little, somewhere between a 16th note triplet, 32nd note flourish across there, which is very, very reminiscent of what Kerry King's Slayer would do. And this is why it's equally important when you're vamping on this particular riff to do it with a downstroke, so that when you do want to throw in that little flourish, you can do with the alternate picking, and it makes sure that you actually land directly back in the groove of the song again. So I'll give you some little examples along with this pulse. Just to kind of get that flourish between that consistent 16th note picking with the downstroke, and then with those flourishes with the alternate picking, just to kind of give it real teeth and give it a lot of real aggressive feel. It's more of an instinctive thing as well, so the key thing is to start off slow and then kind of building it into the conventional downstrokes that you've been doing for the early part of the song. The tail on that, after we've done the old Kerry triplet there, just sort of sliding into nothing, and it always tends to come in slightly syncopated, so you get that 1E and 2, and going into the next variation, the tail, rather than having the slide going across the 12th fret, we're going to have this little tail around the first position, which should sound like this in context. Slowing down that riff, we're doing a picking motion, little pull off going from the first fret to the open position, and then, because it's a note of F, getting the octave on the 3rd fret of the D string. Now I tend to actually get that with an upstroke, everything else is being down, and do a bit of outer picking, going from down on the low E, up on the D, back down to the F on the low E, and then pulling off. You could do this all down, but I just find that little bit of release in there is just good for the motion in the hand. It kind of creates a little less tension and stress in there as well, but that would be my particular pointer on that. Okay, looking into the 3rd bar, the tail end now is going to go back into the higher register, but this time it's going to be with a unison bend going on the 12th fret, like so, and entering just after the 4th beat. So I'll get myself in, it will be a bit like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. And put it in context with the riff, with the BPM, should sound like this. And what Jeff does as well is there's a second guitar in there to play a flat third harmony, which will be based on the 15th fret on the top E. And hearing them both together, it's really classic Annihilator all over. Very, very characteristic of the sort of stuff that Jeff puts to record. And on the final tail end, we go from the slide we had in these positions, but rather than actually going towards here or here, we then actually play effectively the riff backwards, going now from G sharp to A, E to F. And where that comes in is going to be the offbeat straight after the 3. So you count yourself in like a 1, 2, 3. Whereas before, a lot of the changes were going 1-a, 2-a. This one's going and-a, 4-a. So it's got that kind of juxtaposition syncopation there, which is pretty cool. And along with the BPM, it should sound a little bit like this. 3, 4. And the important thing is to make sure after you've played that F, that the strings are muted, giving a nice dynamic pause within that particular riff. So when it comes in again, it's really hammer and tongs and sounds really, really punchy. Putting all those together, should sound like this. And there will be a repeat of that 4-bar progression. Take in mind when we go back into the F tail, rather than doing the split unison, what Jeff does is some stabs with just the F5 power chord. And that's very, very straight, like a 1, 2, 3. So it just kind of lands on the syncopation straight after the third pulse, and then just goes 4 and like a 1, 2, 3. And the rest of it is more or less the same. And then you're back into another variation of the verse, and it goes chorus again. Okay, so let's look at the middle 8 of the song. The middle 8 of the song is going to be based around the key of D. And the closest scale we'll be using will be the D minor harmonic minor. Which is exactly the same as an all diatonic minor, it just has a raised 7th, a natural 7th in it. So 1, 2, flat 3rd, 4th, 5th, flat 6th, natural leading turn to the 7th, and then go into your octave. And it's going to be sliding from D5, F5, E5, C sharp 5, which would be your leading tone, your 7th, behind your root note on your 5th fret. Just moving around in 8th notes effectively. And then it has a little breakdown, once again within the riff, kind of keeping that same motif, but keeping it more in a skylic fashion, taking out the power chord, playing amongst the scale in the top register. And just playing from, let's say, the 7th fret on the G, stepping down the notes of F and E on the 6th fret and the 5th fret of the E string, and then going to the 6th fret on the G string. And the dynamic kind of builds a little bit like this. There's a single note variation of that. You can also do, which Jeff taught us, is actually put it into an octave. So it goes back to the original shape, but you just take out the 5th. And playing thumb, going across on your bass string of A, index finger going on your G string, kind of keeping a nice loose bar so that D string is muted. And having a relatively soft pluck there as well. Coming in, bring your pick back into play, big strike on the D5. And another thing Jeff does is once again applying the flat third in there as well, which kind of emulates what they do in the harmony of the vocal. And then playing between, which would be the 8th fret, the 12th fret, the 10th fret, and then the 7th fret, which would be playing between the intervals of the flat third, the 5th, the 4th, the 2nd, and the flat third. So you get the first variation, and then the second variation. Okay, that brings us to the end of part 2. Join me back here for part 3, where we'll be predominantly looking at the guitar solo. But in the meantime, keep rocking and stay inspired. We'll see you soon.